King Hrol set out with a sortie of questing knights, sons and daughters of the West. Hrol had seen visions of a cataclysm to come, Tamriel overflowing with blood-sucking serpents. Saint Alicia's influence over the Heartland had been wavering, for her people had forgotten her teachings after her passing. King Hrol had not forgotten. Before his host appeared at last a spirit who resembled none other than Alestia, queen of ancient times, who bore in her left hand the dragonfire of the Akatosh, and in her right hand the jewels of the Covenant, and on her breast a wound that spilt void onto her mangled feet. Hrol and his knights fell to their knees and prayed. Alicia's spirit fled from the unworthy knights, just as the people of Sirad had fled from her. It was King Hrol who found her amidst the hills and forests. When he found her again, he said, "I love you, sweet Aless, sweet wife of Shor and of Auriel and the sacred bull, and would render this land alive again, not through pain, but through a return to the dragonfires of Covenant, to join East and West and throw off all ruin." Pleased, the spirit opened naked before the king, and bid Hrol to make love with the land itself. When his knights found him, King Hrol was dead against a mound of mud, his labours seemingly drawing the life from him. But after 9 months, that mound of mud became a small mountain, and there were whispers among the shepherds and bulls. A small community of believers gathered around that growing hill during the days of its first churning, and they were the first to name it the Golden Hill, Sancretor. And it was the shepherdess, said Yenna, who dared climb the hill when she heard his first cry, and at its peak she saw what it had yielded. An infant she named Reman, which is light of man, and in the child's forehead was the Kim-El Adabal, alive with the dragon fires of yore and divine promise, and none dared obstruct, said Yenna, when she climbed the steps of White Gold Tower to place the babe Reman on his throne, where he spoke as an adult, saying, "I am Cyrodiil come." Hey guys, it's Drew here and welcome back to FudgeMuppet. Today we return to First Era Tamriel, a time where the myth and folklore of the Dawn and Malefic eras converge with the recorded histories of modern times. This coalescence of fact and fable is what I find fascinating about the continent's early history. Reman Cyrodiil was most certainly a man, and one of Cyrodiil's greatest emperors, but he was somehow simultaneously a mystical entity, not entirely human, born from the very soil to be the embodiment of the Heartland's will. In this video we're going to learn all there is to know about Reman Cyrodiil and his dynasty, from the commonly accepted records of the chroniclers to the supernatural stories told by the superstitious. Reman's legacy begins at the Golden Hill, Sancretor. The significance of this city to the Imperials varies across sources, but no matter which story is true, Sancretor remains, in some form or another, the birthplace of a prospering empire of men in the Heartland. Some say Sancretor was where Saint Alicia received the divine inspiration for her rebellion, and she subsequently founded her holy city on the site. However, the mythical origins of Reman Cyrodiil, born of Hrol's copulation with the earth, suggests that the hill did not exist prior to his birth, over 2 millennia after Empress Alicia's death. Perhaps the tale of Reman's loamy conception is meant in a metaphorical way, and Reman was simply born at the Golden Hill, via good old-fashioned consensual sex in the missionary position for the sole purpose of procreation. Whatever the truth may be, the connection between Saint Alicia, Reman Cyrodiil and the Golden Hill is anything but ordinary. When Pelennor Whitestrake tore his way across the Aelid Empire, he challenged the Sorcerer King Haramir of Copper and Tea to a duel at Sancretor. This was around the 242nd year of the First Era, when he killed the Aelid king, eating the tyrant's neck veins in a visceral display of martial superiority. Pelennor screamed praise to Reman, a name that no one knew yet. Reman would eventually be born on this very hill, though not for over approximately 2,400 years. Born from the soil or the womb, it mattered not, for Reman would lay claim to the realm and save it from ruination. When asked about Reman Cyrodiil, most people would tell you the Heartland of Tamriel was named for their old emperor. However, the province was not named after him. The reality is that Reman adopted the ancient Aelid name for the province, Sirad, as his surname. King Hrol's vision of Tamriel overrun by snakes would soon be realised. The Sisey snake men of Akaviri rid their own continent of dragons, though it was believed that some evaded their extinction and fled west to the land of Dawn's beauty, Tamriel. The Snake Men pursued them and carried out the first Akaviri invasion. Rumours had it that the Saisi were not only seeking to wipe out the dragons of Tamriel, but they were also searching for someone. Their order of dragon slayers was named the Dragon Guard, and they were looking for their leader, the Dragonborn. While the forces of Akavir got more than they bargained for in Skyrim, facing the Nords on the battlefield as well as the dragons, the Northmen were no match for the Dragon Guard. The Saisi cut their way through Skyrim and soon posed a major threat to Cyrodiil. They had made it all the way to the Jural Mountains with relative ease, and soon established a temporary headquarters in the fort nestled in the Pale Pass. Meanwhile, Reman Cyrodiil had achieved a feat thought impossible, at least since the death of Queen Alicia. Reman rallied the armies of the Nibene Valley and joined them with his Colovian forces. Reman and his united Cyrodiil would meet the Akaviri invaders at the border. The Saisi likely had no intention to withdraw from the conflict, but even if they had, there was an unforeseen complication. The invasion had initially begun on the eastern coast of Morrowind, and Vivek was not one to allow such a trespass to go unpunished. He allied the Dunmer with the Trident Kings of the Dregs, and attacked the invaders from the rear. Any hope of a hasty retreat was now off the table, as was the option to send for resupplies or reinforcements. The more realistic scholars, the ones who were skeptical of the poetic rendition of the histories, claims this is ultimately what led to an anticlimactic battle of the Pale Pass. Saisi rations ran dry, and they were forced to surrender. Different accounts claim something else entirely, though the two explanations may not be mutually exclusive. When Reman Cyrodiil led his legions into the Pale Pass, the remaining Dragon Guard, upon hearing his voice, abandoned their fortress and genuflected before him, kneeling in the snow. The foreign hordes proclaimed him their conqueror and their saviour, and they swore their lives to him. Fragments of lost First Era texts refer to this powerful moment in history. Supposedly, the Saisi warriors spoke to Reman and said, "We have been searching for you." Reman Cyrodiil found himself in a formidable position. The Nords were weakened, the Colovian and Nibonese Imperials were united, and their ranks were bolstered by masses of incredibly capable and staunchly loyal foreign fighters. These Saisi warriors had sworn to serve Reman and his descendants, and with them filling out the ranks of his army, Reman had the power needed to unify most of Tamriel and found the Second Empire. Cyrodiil became truly cosmopolitan as a result of this, incorporating aspects of High Rock, Colovia, Nibene, and a sprinkling of Akaviri culture into a common whole. With this unified nation, Reman began to expand the influence of the new Cyrodiilic Empire. The successful conglomeration of the human kingdoms under the Second Empire was a major concern to the elves of Somerset. It seemed likely to Reman and his advisors that the Ultima would attempt to stifle the growth of renewed human imperialism. As is often the case with the High Elves, they elected to isolate themselves and did not test the might of Reman's amalgamated armies. As the folktales had promised, Reman returned Cyrodiil to its former glory. The Dragonfires and Amulet of Kings given to Alicia all those centuries ago by Akatosh were brought back into the fold. The rites of becoming emperor were reinstituted. When an heir ascended to the Ruby Throne, the fires were relit and kept burning throughout his or her lifetime. This represented the covenant between the Empire and Akatosh. The Amulet of Kings was also given to the newly crowned emperor and was to be worn as the sovereign's symbol of office. It should come as no surprise that Reman would be remembered as the culture god hero to Imperials across Tamriel. His legacy would outlive his bloodline, as the rituals set in place, as well as the prestige of the Cyrodiilic Empire, would be the Heartland's greatest source of pride. Reman Cyrodiil died in the 2762nd year of the First Era, and was buried in Sancretor, beneath the golden hill he had once emerged from. The rest of Reman's 217-year dynasty is somewhat uncertain. We know who ruled, and vaguely when they were crowned and died, but even then it seems the sources love to contradict each other. Reman's heir was named Castav, and we have to assume that he was crowned shortly after Reman's death. The first piece of documented evidence of his reign comes from the year 2801, when he made a controversial decision, commanding the Dragon Guard of Skyhaven Temple to seize Nordic hostages and coerce them to join the organization, fulfilling strict conscription quotas imposed upon Skyrim's Jarls. The text, Annals of the Dragon Guard, written by a member of the Guard at the time, noted just how averse Emperor Castav was to heeding the counsel of his advisors. predecessors. The master of the Dragon Guard warned Castav that seizing hostages would cause trouble, but his protests were denied, as usual. Inevitably, a revolt occurred. Castav ordered the master to send Dragon Guard forces to suppress the uprising in Winterhold, but he refused. Castav wasn't fond of dissent, and cut off the Dragon Guard's supplies to teach them a lesson about insolence. The Dragon Guard made arrangements with the Reachmen to become self-sufficient, and it was Castav who came off second best. His dire handling of his first major test, and his unwise decision to enforce uncompromising quotas, branded him as an incompetent ruler, and this blemish on his reputation would never fade. The Winterhold Rebellion happened in the year 2804, and Castav was deposed soon after, so we can assume that he forfeited the Ruby Throne in either 2805 or 2806. The discovery of Emperor Castav's epitaph in the Murkmire region of Blackmarsh reveals what happened to Castav between his dismissal and his death. Despite being forced to abdicate, Castav was still considered sacrosanct, so he spent the next 6 or 7 years in exile. His mortal remains were buried in Murkmire in the year 2812. The exact year Castav's successor, Reman II, took the throne seems uncertain. The Annals of the Dragon Guard say it happened as soon as Castav was deposed, and this makes the most sense. However, Reman II's tomb in Sancretor claims he was crowned in 2812, the year of Castav's death. I think it's safe to assume the former source is correct, and the tombstone doesn't account for Castav's period of exile. Reman II, to the joy of the imperial citizens, was much more like his namesake than Castav. He swiftly negotiated an end to the Winterhold rebellion his predecessor had caused. New and untested, Reman II managed to strike peace with the angered Nords, without any bloodshed. On top of this, he endeared himself to the Empire's best military minds, as he quickly became a master tactician. He apparently spent hours studying records of the battles he fought. When he conquered new territory for the Empire, he established rule with a careful hand, avoiding too much disruption to local customs, traditions, and particularly to establish trade. The imperial culture spread, but not through forced assimilation. Rather, the people came to accept and support the Empire by reaping the benefits of free trade, stability, and the development of better infrastructure. He gathered advisors from each province and focused on his people more than many emperors ever had. He also implemented legislation to outlaw necromancy and Daedra worship, and the Second Empire flourished. It was Reman II who permitted the Dragon Guard to craft their masoned magnum opus, Alduin's Wall, which was constructed within Skyhaven Temple. 6 years after its completion, in First Era 2812, Reman himself came to the temple to dedicate the wall and consecrate the Blood Seal, though it seemed Reman II's success would lead him to grow overconfident. The last remaining mainland provinces that were not under imperial control were Blackmarsh and Morrowind, and Reman sought to change this. Over the course of the 2830s, Reman II attempted to conquer Argonia, but he showed an uncharacteristic lack of caution. The imperial legions lost more men to the bogs, to disease and natural fauna, than they did in combat with the Argonians. Against the odds, in 2837, Reman II declared that Blackmarsh had been successfully annexed. In actuality, the Empire had made footholds in the north and east, but that was the extent of the conquest. Hungry for a more substantial victory, Reman II turned his attention to Morrowind, a land much more easy to traverse. But while the home of the Dunmer was easier to cross, they faced much stronger resistance under the leadership of the demigod tribunal. The Imperial legions were in for another bloody conflict. This war became known as the Fourscore War, and as the name suggests, it endured for 80 long years. After 80 years, I don't think anyone can imagine an end, said Vivek with a smile, but he grew serious, trusting Almalexia's prophecies. Who will win, Morrowind or the Cyrodiilic Empire? The war commenced in 2840, but Reman II would not live long enough to see its conclusion, and he died in battle in the year 2851. At least, that's what we gather from his tomb at Sancretor, which said he ruled for 39 years, from 2812 to 2851. High King Emmerich's musings on Reman II's life contradicts this, claiming Reman actually died in the year 2843. But whatever the exact date is, he died early in the Fourscore War. He was succeeded by Brasilus Dor, an emperor we know scarce little about. We do know he was fond of leading his vanguard into battle, so gallantry was a trait he shared with the two two Remans. But Dor was not too keen on matters of state, and spent most of his reign in the countryside, in his estate near Skingrad. He allowed his Akaviri potentate, his chief advisor, to take care of the Empire's affairs. The only clear evidence of Dor's death came from Reman III's tomb, which indicated how long he reigned before his death. The year was 2877, and the final monarch of the Reman dynasty, Reman III, took the throne. He continued the war started by his grandfather Reman II, and fought Morrowind until the bitter end. But this war would end in an anticlimactic fashion, despite a major victory at the Battle of Blackgate, with Imperial forces sacking the fortress. Reman, along with his only heir Juliek, were assassinated by the Morag Tong, thus ending the Reman dynasty. With no Dragonborn to take up the throne, Reman Cyrodiil's work seemed to be undone. The long 430-year reign of the Akaviri potentate came next, and it would take another 424 years on top of that before the Ruby Throne would see another Dragonborn heir. And so ends the story of the Reman dynasty, the tale of Cyrodiil born in the shape of a man, the legend of the short-lived but prosperous Reman Empire. I hope you enjoyed the video, guys. Thanks so much for watching. I've been Drew, and I'll see you in the next one.